Hold on. There we go. We still never get the motor plan down of sharing screen on Zoom. It's too complicated. All right. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to our first Brain Club of the new month, which I'm very excited about. And that's because for the next 8 weeks, we are going to be talking about my favorite thing to talk about in the whole world, which is brains. And because there are a couple new people, I am Mel Hauser. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of All Brains Belong. And as visual description, I'm wearing a fluffy red fleece with short brown hair, and I have a teal wall behind me. So here we go. I wanted to bring, I talk about brains all day long. It's like my job and my monotropic focus. So I wanted to take a different approach than I usually do, which is I think that when we're having conversations about solving problems, like the relevance of problems, and we can make the zoomed out process connected to solving that problem, that works for that particular slice. But what I wanted to do today is I wanted to talk about what would happen if we didn't have problems to solve. Like, what if we just actually raised kids to know about how things are? Like, what if we just told them like how it was? So that's what this is going to be about. Because the truth is, we all have different brains. That's a world rule. If you've not been to a All Brains Belong gathering yet, you may not have heard that concept. I talk about brain rules, which are like the things that we think are universal life truths, but we made up, versus like true world rules where, like, don't hit people in the head. It's a world rule. Like, so the real world rule is that we all have different brains. So how do we teach kids about that from the ground up? Because I think that's the key to the universe. Just by way of introduction, ground rules, remember, all forms of participation are okay. You can just unmute and shout stuff out. You can hit your button, your raise hand button. You can actually raise your hand. And you can type in the chat box, really anything, or, none of those things. You don't need to make eye contact. You don't even have to have your video on. You can fidget, you can eat, you can leave, you can have kids and pets and all the things climbing all over you. That's usually what goes on here. So you be you. And if you haven't done it already, and if it's not popping up automatically, the way you turn on closed captioning is at the bottom of your screen. I've enabled it, but you can toggle it on by clicking either the live transcript CC over here or the more ... Those will both be your pathways to choose either the live transcript or the subtitles along the bottom. So I'm going to divide this hour into 3 parts. Part 1, why does it matter that we all have different brains? Part 2, how do we do this in concrete ways, talking with kids about their brains, your brain, all the brains. And once you learn about your brain, you can then, that's like the prerequisite for raising our kids as self-advocates, to be able to know what you need and be able to communicate that to the people around you. So just by way of introduction, I'm a family doc. I take care of babies through older adults, often multi-generational families, with a particular focus on supporting the people with brains who learn, think, and communicate differently than the so-called majority of brains, although I take care of patients with all types of brains. And this is Ladybug. Ladybug is my guru of all of the keys to the universe. Ladybug has taught me about my brain, all the brains, all the things, because her brain is so incredible. I want to begin just by throwing this out there. Optional participation question. To you, what does inclusion mean? You can shout it out, type in the chat box. Hi, Matthew. What's
what
inclusion
inclusion
to you?
means is accessibility for all.
For all.
And it's, you know, the concept of everyone has a part to play.
Amen. Power of all brains. Everyone's got a part to play to contribute to an accessible and inclusive world.
I think
Others, what does inclusion mean? Go ahead, yeah.
Inclusion means that no matter what you bring to the table or no matter what you have in your head, it will, if you'll be able to find a spot for yourself.
Yeah.
I'm going to play off of that. Inclusion is being able to be yourself and not having any of the things that you need for self-regulation or for just being who you are pushed back. And it's really, in my role, I look at inclusion as meeting people where they are and going from that point, and not where they're expected to be by others or not where we're hoping that they will be, but right where they are, right in that safe space for them. And sometimes that looks like being in a classroom, an inclusive classroom, and sometimes that looks like having a space all of their own to regulate.
Amen. Being your authentic self, whatever that looks like. In the chat, we've got all people being able to show up and be their authentic self and have that self be celebrated. Comment, I love the celebrated part. Another comment, to see someone. Being yourself and being accepted and respected as yourself, knowing that you bring value as your genuine self. Oh, I love this. I want to hang out with you guys all day. This is wonderful. To me, inclusion means belonging. Belonging. Each person as their true self, authentic, genuine self, feeling like they belong. And that means that the only person who can tell you whether or not inclusion has been achieved is that person. And I'll submit to you that since we know that we all have different brains, if we don't design a world and a community and a culture around that world rule, we're going to have lots of people who don't feel that they belong. So that's why we're talking about this. So we all have different brains. I'm not sure I knew this. Like when I became a parent, I had a lot of brain rules. That's me 6 years ago. So soon, so eager and so much anticipation about, this baby that was going to come, and like I was going to be, this kind of mama and all the things. And I read all the books and all the things. It turns out, like, I didn't know anything about brains because I don't know, I was taught by society, medical education, like life, that there was one type of baby. And this is what happened with this baby. This is the baby, all the babies, they all are the same baby. Guess what? That's like not a thing, right? And so my baby taught me that right away, because turns out I had a baby who did not get born into an inclusive family, an inclusive environment, an accessible environment. I had a baby that came into the world as a self-advocate. And oh my goodness, did that baby communicate her physiologic response to the environment that I had created. And she communicated that in no uncertain terms, that her nervous system was not regulated because I had not made my environment based on her needs. I didn't know what those needs were, because I had all my brain rules, but it was very clear that there was a mismatch between her needs and the environment. And the thing is, now, this is all a work in progress as for all of us, but that like zooming way out, if I could redo the past 5.5 years, I wish I knew that there was no one right way to be a parent, no one right way to be a child, or, like a human, and that the most important things in the universe our safety and connection, and that inclusion. So what it all comes down to is that brain science in 2022 is such that we all have different brains. We all sense, we take in information, process it, learn, think, communicate, move differently. We all have unique patterns of strengths and challenges. And since we don't know how someone else's brain processes the world, experiences the world, and often people themselves don't know how their brain experiences the world, universal design that is using multimodal, flexible, differentiated options for engagement, that's best practices. But we don't live in that world yet, right? We don't. And so what that's going to mean is that if you have the kind of brain whose needs based on these parameters are not able to be accomplished because of the barriers imposed by the environment, you're gonna have a whole bunch of mismatch. I like this cartoon. I use it a lot in lots of presentations, which is that like, we know there's different types of cell phones. They all have different ways of doing things. It's not like one's better than the other. They're just different. You don't like expect the iPhone to run Samsung products. You just don't do that. But we kind of forget that with humans. Let's go through it. So our brain takes in information from the surroundings. That input comes in through our sensory processing pathways. We process it and then we do stuff with it. We take in that information using our 9 senses. 9 senses, would you believe it? So there's the 5 that many of us know about, and this is just for visual description. There is a wheel with each segment of the wheel representing a sensory system. So sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell, but then some sensory systems that we don't always talk about, which is our vestibular system, like your GPS in your inner ear that tells you where you are in space. Proprioception, feeling the input from your muscles, your ligaments, your bones about your body moving. Interoception, the signals of your inside your body signals. And neuroception. Neuroception is your threat detection system. And we all have very different sensory processing systems. And they're not static. They might be one way when you're born, and then over the course of your life, they evolve as your nervous system develops, or based on the relative state of trauma and dysregulation that you acquired. But also it is contextual. If you're really stressed out, dysregulated, maybe your vestibular system processes information differently, during this time versus another time. And so just kind of knowing that, having that framework, and this ends up, in my experience, this ends up being something that even very young kids can kind of get. One of the models that I have that I found useful, both with my own child, we've been talking about this since she's a toddler, really, and this works for lots of young patients, is I think about, and I didn't make this up, it's a thing, and I will, when I send out the link, I will, I should find out who made this up because it's so genius, so I can appropriately give credit. But the idea of thinking that each of these 9 senses have their own cups, like a hearing cup, a taste cup, a smell cup. And the idea is that every nervous system is trying to fill its cup for each of the senses and not overflow it. So I have my hearing cup, it's like this big, like literally it overflows if I hear pretty much anything, and I flip my lid when I overflow it. My but like my vestibular system, I can't even like look over my shoulder without like feeling it, but my proprioceptive cup, I need a fair amount of input for here. Or like my interoception, I don't feel that I'm hungry until I am hangry. And the idea is you talk about this stuff like it's no big deal, because it's not, and you just know this about yourself, and you kind of recognize like, oh, okay, Which is why we've got, preschoolers who can walk around now and say, oh, I need more vestibular input. These are the kids, little nervous systems find out what they need a lot until we as the adults get in the way. So if you see a kid who's like spinning around in circles, flipping upside down, well, that's a sweet little love who needs vestibular input. They have not filled their cup, either because they, that their cup is really big all the time, or it's really big right now. They need more input, and they get it. Or really a lot of things you see in little kids who have not been influenced, forced to mask, shamed, little kids, you can kind of tell what their sensory needs are. A lot of the time, much more so than adults who have all these layers of trauma and shame and this and like the collective brain rule that there's some things that are acceptable and some things that are not. Neuroception is an interesting concept, and this is more of a modern brain science thing. And so your threat detection system, your limbic system, is constantly monitoring your environment, safe or not safe. And nervous systems are wired such to have a more sensitive threat detection system. So, and often this changes over time, often in response to trauma, macro trauma and micro everyday trauma. And yeah, I will totally share this slideshow after. I'm sorry for missing that chat comment, for sure. I'll send out my slides along with the recording, for sure. So anyway, so if I am a sweet little love and I come into an environment and my neuroceptive system says, nah, not safe. And that might be because it's sensory related, like it's loud, or it might just be energy, like the vibe, the energy in the room. If you have the kind of brain that is taking in a lot of people's energy, we call those people empaths, and you feel it. You know that it's not safe. And then you look around and the people around you are like, they don't look like it's unsafe. And if you don't know that we all have different brains, oh, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe, and then you over the course of decades you learn to not trust your intuition. You learn to self-invalidate. And really have brain-body disconnect, which leads to all kinds of physical and mental health problems. Another way in which brains differ is in terms of our utilization of the brain chemical dopamine. So dopamine, if you've heard of that, maybe you've heard about this as our pleasure, interest, motivation related brain chemical that we all have. And everybody, when you feel it, all brains kind of, respond to it, get that dopamine rush when you're doing something you like. But there are brains that really require it to make their neural pathways run. I call that the dopamine bound brains. There are actually brains that don't require dopamine to do the things. So there are brains where you can say, hey, brain, go learn that thing, because you need it for your life. And they just learn it. I have no idea what that's like because I have a dopamine bound brain. But that is something that is a world rule, that we have differences. And so what that means is if you have a dopamine bound brain and you, quote, can't do a thing, it may not be because there's something wrong with you. It may mean because that thing did not give you dopamine. You did not have enough dopamine. And if you in fact had enough dopamine, you would have been able to do the thing. So it's external access, internal access, all of that accessibility aspect is really important. And I teach little kids about dopamine on the regular. And it's important that everybody knows what gives you dopamine. So that you can go get it. And that's why in educational settings when we learn about kids' interests and we can deliver skills and knowledge in the context of someone's interests and passion, it's not because we're like playing a game. It's not like because we're gaming them or manipulating. It's because they actually get dopamine. The dopamine bound brain needs dopamine. And that's why it works. And if the dopamine bound brain does not get dopamine, the dopamine bound brain will seek dopamine and might seek it in the context of, video games all the day. It might seek dopamine in the context of like, running 3 hours a day, feel good and safe in your body. It might be like alcohol, drugs. I mean, the dopamine bound brain needs dopamine and will seek it. It's a world rule. So knowing that and teaching really little tiny dopamine bound brains about it really can make a big difference. We also differ in terms of how our upstairs brain, downstairs brain are going to respond to different situations. So this is a model from The Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. Upstairs brain, your cortex, that's your thinking, your higher level planning, organizing, decision making. Downstairs brain is your limbic system, that involuntary fight or flight type stuff. And it is a world rule that you don't get to pick what's going to set downstairs brain off. Dan Siegel has a model with a hand that I like to teach little kids. So upstairs brain, downstairs brain. And then when you get triggered, when downstairs brain gets triggered, flip your lid and then breathe, bring back upstairs brain. So downstairs brain's in charge because it's supposed to keep you alive. You want it to be in charge. And often when we don't keep that in mind, we end up like getting into situations where we're interpreting sweet little loves, downstairs brain responses in the context of like conscious, intentional decisions made by upstairs brain. And that's not fair. It makes the people feel bad, and it's not helpful and does not contribute to, the things we talked about before: safety, accessibility, showing up authentically. Dysregulation, meaning when you flip your lid and downstairs brain's calling the shots, is going to look different in different brains also. So you might have, and even within the same person, depending on context. So, you might have a person who they are running away, a person who is, throwing things, punching, aggression. So your flight, your fight. You might have people that kind of get stuck with some sticky thoughts, some kind of ruminative, repetitive. That's that flood of overwhelming thoughts. Just feel tired, or if it has that kind of glaze over, kind of dissociated disconnect. Need to make my world smaller. It's going to look different, and even little kids can learn about this stuff. This is a book I love, Self-Reg by Stuart Shanker, a framework for teaching kids about their own regulation needs, to be able to figure out like what makes you stressed, what makes you calm, and how to do those things. And the zooming out, the idea is when you learn these things, then you are being able to then self-advocate for what you need. And so that it's not like a one size fits all, like, oh, kid is flipping their lid, they need X. Like it's such an individual thing, because we all have different brains. I love this model. This is the Autism Level Up program. I'll send out links in when I send out all the things. But this really is such an incredible framework for people of all ages and all types of brains, not just autistic people and not just kids. The idea is that for any given thing, you have a certain amount of energy, and there's no right or wrong energy. It's just that you kind of need a match between the energy where you are and the energy needed for your activity. And some brains, the emotion, the feeling words, the happy, sad, mad stuff, like just really doesn't resonate because that's not how they feel. Especially if there are some interoceptive differences or social communication differences. You're like, that word that other people use, that's not really how it kind of feels in my body. For me, maybe it's more of like a stuck or a floppy. And so, the individual person comes up with their own terms, has a visual, and then kind of figures out how do you power up or power down on that energy meter. And again, going to be not just individual person, but context specific. Under these circumstances, this is what I need to power up. Under these circumstances, this is what I need to power down. Just so it's so flexible and really helpful. And they have a great website and lots of free resources. So the thing is, even if you've never thought about this before, I think to some extent, everybody has seen that we all have different brains, and we see it in the context of conflicting needs. So if in a given house, we'll take mine, if Ladybug has the kind of brain that needs to make all the noise, and I have the kind of brain that needs like no noise because I have the cup that overflows with like this much auditory input, boom, conflicting access needs. And so having each member of a family, of a class, of a workplace team, like understand about your own brain and the brains of other people, this is really the key to the universe in terms of just recognizing it. Like, there's no like magical solution for it. It's just, okay, we have conflicting access needs. How are we going to negotiate that? How are our upstairs brains going to negotiate that? And not at a time where downstairs brain is calling the shots. So talking with kids about their brains, and my brain, your brain, Elsa's brain, meaning like cartoon characters, like just brains all the time, all the brains. It's just like a normal roll off the tongue thing. And you can just start this whenever you want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play a video. I was like making slides and I thought, didn't I do this already once? And I have this video on my YouTube station from 1.5 years ago that I don't think I could do better. I mean, it's not like an awesome video. It's super low tech and I made it with my cell phone. Like, it's not fancy, but it's this is actually how I talk about it with little kids. So I'm going to play that video clip. I'm not gonna watch the whole thing, I'll watch part of it.
All brains are awesome. Today, I want to talk about my favorite thing to talk about, the brain. We all have different brains that are wired in a certain way to make us who we are. This impacts the way we take information, think, learn, play, communicate, and interact with other people in the world. We all have different things that come easily to us and different things we gotta work harder at. The way that all brains are different, we call that neurodiversity. Diversity means different, neuro means brain, so neurodiversity. And as we grow up, we'll get to know the ways in which our brain is unique, and we'll get to understand the brains of other people. So today we're going to talk about some of the many ways that all brains are different. The most important thing is that there's no right type of brain. There's no right or normal way to be in the world. There's no right way to learn, no right way to communicate or play or think or interact. Like, there's no right way to do anything. Okay, awesome brains, let's go through some of the ways that our brains differ in the way that we sense, feel, think, and do things. I have the kind of brain that organizes information in charts with visual supports. So I've made us a chart. Let's go through it. Okay, number 1, taking in information and sensory processing. Some brains might be sensitive to sound or smell or a lot of visual clutter. Some brains might need a certain amount of movement in order to feel comfortable and alert. And we might differ in terms of how much we notice. I have the kind of brain that notices everything, visually, sound, and like that could be overwhelming, but it's also pretty cool. Besides making videos for you guys, I'm also a doctor, and turns out noticing a whole bunch of stuff is kind of helpful, but can be overwhelming to take in all that information. It's a trade-off. Number 2, we differ in terms of what comes more easily and what we have to work a little harder at. Number 3, communication. We may use our voice, our hands, communication assistive device. We might take long conversational turns or short conversational turns. We might look and listen at the same time or not. Some brains actually hear better when they're looking somewhere different. Number 4, playing interests. We differ in terms of what we like, don't like. We might have a whole lot of interests or just a few that we're really into. We might like to play the same kinds of things, or we might like a whole lot of variety. Different brains prefer different amounts of time alone versus time with other people. That is me time versus we time. Some brains find it easier or harder to join in with others' play or conversations, or feel comfortable making friends. Number 6, our brains differ in terms of what is stressful to our brains. What stresses us out, overwhelms us, upsets us. Some of us are more sensitive to not getting enough sleep or being hungry or thirsty, like we're just more stressed out by different things. Number 7, what helps us relax and cope with that stress? Maybe we listen to or create certain sounds. Maybe we need to move. Maybe we relieve stress more by me time or by we time. Maybe we're comforted by hugs or certain words or lots of space when we're stressed. Number 8, our brains have different ways of expressing ourselves, getting our feelings out, whether that be through talking or screaming. Big responses is a very common way for brains to express themselves. Music, dance, art, writing, all kinds of things. Number 9, our brains think differently. Some brains make plans, some brains go with the flow. So we differ in terms of, how much we want something a certain way and how we handle change or interruptions to our plans, or how well we handle kind of not knowing what to expect. We also differ in something called executive functioning, which is how our brain coordinates all of our thinking and planning and organizing. That ends up being really important for number 10, how we learn. Some brains learn best by seeing, hearing, doing things, a combination, and our brains differ in terms of what kinds of supports help us learn. So there you have it, and these are some of the ways that our brains can be different and unique. And it's just about learning about your brain and about the brains of other people so that we can celebrate our awesome brains. Some of these brain differences, when they occur in certain patterns or certain amounts, we have different words or terms for that, such as ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dysgraphia. There's all kinds of terms that we can talk more about. The point is that all these different aspects all add up together to determine, what impacts your experience in your life. In conclusion, we all have different things about our lives that we want to understand, and learning about your brain is the best way to make sense of your life. This way you can learn what you need and how to get those needs met. You'll also be able to figure out how to understand the brains of other people, which will make a lot of things easier for you. And when you interact with other people, you'll find that there's some way that your brain is similar to the other person's brain, and many ways in which you're different. We need everyone's brains to work together. We can all use our strengths as brain teamwork to make the world a better place.
All right. Here we go. Resume share. Okay. So hold on a second. Toggling between windows when I have the kind of brain that needs a lot of contrast to see something and I can't see the window with the X. Ah, there we go. Okay. Back in business. So those parameters, like, so those 10 things, and by the way, I have that in like a little PDF that I'll also share with you. I just literally talk about that all day long. I have the kind of brain that, and like any of the 10 things, all day. I started that at like 2.5 when my child was 2.5. And when I'm in the office with kids, you know, typically developing kids, just, oh, wow, that's so interesting that your brain did that with that toy. My brain did that. And like somebody else I saw did that. That's so cool that we all have different brains that do different things with that toy. Or if I'm watching a movie like Frozen, you know, oh man, Elsa has a kind of brain that doesn't like the crowd, just like orienting those like thinking about thinking, metacognition skills, which are like, they're really important executive functioning skills. And you can really start this process in toddlerhood. Because if all kids grow up knowing that there's not a default brain, you know, even a typically developing kid, like there's no one right brain. Like, you know, no one should think their brain is the only way that a brain does a thing. So if there's no default way that a brain does a thing, we all have different brains that do things differently, then we don't have the default versus everything else, because the everything else is other. And when someone feels like other, that is not inclusion. Because then you don't feel, when you don't feel that you belong because your brain doesn't do things according to the default, that's not inclusion. So, and this is just another version of what you just saw, of just, you know, there's no right way to do the things, and becoming an awareness of your sensory, you know, what, you know, your sensory systems, your sensory cups. What does your brain like? What does your brain not like? What helps you power up? What helps you power down, or, you know, regulate, and how to communicate that to other people. And this is just a graphic showing that, you know, because I sometimes when we talk about neurodiversity, there's like this myth that we're, you know, talking about one particular thing, but really there's no default brain. It's like a whole thing. So I wanted to show like you know, these kind of patterns of ways of doing things sometimes get labels, but everything is on a continuum. And we do live in a world where, you know, naming the thing is kind of the key to open the door to get accommodations and supports. If we lived in a world where there truly was universal design, this would be less of a thing, but that's not the world we live in 2022. But all of these, oh, hold on a second. Brittany, go for it.
I just want to say that, yeah, like if we didn't have labels, everything would be so much easier to for judgments, because if there wasn't labels, then people wouldn't be judging other people. So yeah, that's,
yeah. And Brittany, I think you raise a really important point. I think that, you know, if the judgment that comes from labels is often because people don't really understand what the label means. I'm autistic, and when I describe autism to people, I it like in a very different way. I do it like according to brain science and like real life, as opposed to the way that it is typically defined through the, deficit-based medical model. I talk about dopamine-bound brain with attentional processing differences and taking in a whole lot of information and having that and like while someone might like list a stereotypical behavior, when viewed through the lens of the brain, it like makes sense. So if someone, for example, I'll just taking autism, like ironic that I have the slide up that says this is not just about autism, but it's like, what's coming to mind to give examples of, some of the stereotypical autistic behaviors that people talk about and like try to train away or whatever, they're explained by the actual brain. Like an autistic nervous system has an attentional system, a dopamine bound attentional system, such that it is you're taking in so much information and has a tendency to block out you have to try to block it out, otherwise your brain's going to explode. So kind of easier to flip to kind of shift into a monotropic, one like a couple things at a time that I'm anchoring my attention in, kind of easier to get into flow state, but can do it like all day, like to even to thoughts, to anything. And so it's kind of like even a neurotypical, whatever that means, a neurotypical person like watching a football game. Actually, so I'm going to send out another link. I have this on the All Brains Belong Facebook group now. This is like one of the coolest things I've seen in a long time. So Fergus Murray, they are an autistic science teacher, scholar in the UK, and their mother is the first person to describe monotropism, which is the theory of not just autism, but a lot of the dopamine bound neurodivergencies, that nervous systems that are wired such that things capture attention fewer things at a time and do so more intensely than other brains. That's monotropism. So Fergus Murray gives the example in this interview of person's watching a football game and it's like the last 5 minutes of the game and everyone's like in it like so, and then someone changes the channel and people and like the person flips their lid that they were like in it and got interrupted. But then Fergus Murray's like, yeah, that happens like all day long. Like, can you imagine if that happened all day long? Think I'm going to be dysregulated? Like, yeah. So anyway, that was a long-winded, because I have the kind of brain that has no idea what I'm going to say before I say it. I just start talking and I verbally process. The point about the label is that a lot of times, so you need the label for accommodations. We wish we lived in a world where accommodations were not needed, because the world was actually designed with accessibility and inclusion. But it's also like the stigma and judgment that come from not really even understanding the thing, not even really understanding the thing that got labeled. Last part, and then I'd be happy to open up for questions in chat. Self-advocacy. So when you are aware of your brain, how your brain is taking in information, processing it, how your brain, communicates, my ladybug has the kind of brain like mine that has no idea what she's going to say before she says it. So speaks in long conversational turns, but both Ladybug and I also have the kind of brain that have auditory processing such that long conversational turns are really hard to listen to. So that's conflicting access needs, but it's about like, all right, well, can you say that again? Can we say that, so we can kind of negotiate that. Because there's no, it's not like one of us is right or wrong. It's that We all have different brains. And so with that, I would love to take your questions and comments, either shout it out, type in the chat, whatever you'd like.
Hey, this is Matthew. I raised my hand. But yeah, it's just, just to, feedback on what you had said. It's just the way our minds work. And like you, I'm that same way. A very insightful way. Pretty much I see problems within what I see and interpret of those, problems that I see. Like with the system of Vermont, I see it so many faucets, so many problems and issues that is like an onion. You're peeling it away one at a time and seeing the different aspects of what's underlying problems within the system. For me, it's more of like you, I have autism, ADHD, fetal alcohol syndrome, which I was born with. For me, I see things very clearly. I use this as a gift. People sit there and say having autism is a curse. But to me, I use it as a gift. We all have special gifts that we could use. And for me to use it so people can understand what we go through and really get down there and understand that the way of living that we live actually quite normal. It's the way our processes and mind are thinking about. Thank you.
Thinking about thinking. That's that metacognition piece. Yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to share that the more that we're talking to kids about their brains, the more that they're sharing it with people and the more that it's just really being understood. My son's music teacher approached me a couple of days ago and said, I really want to tell you about something that happened in music class. We were working on listening to sounds and someone said, well, that's not right. That's not how I heard it. And my son, I wasn't there for this, but I guess stood up and said, well, but that's the way that my brain heard it. And my brain works differently than your brain does. And he said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I'm autistic and I don't think you are. So my brain works differently than your brain works. And the music teacher said, does anyone have any questions about this? And someone said, no, my brain works different than that too. And I think that the more that we start, I loved your cell phone image because it's so true. It's not that it's different from a typical brain, because really what is a typical brain? None of our brains work the same way. And so hearing that other kids were like, well, my brain works different too. I'm not autistic, but my brain works differently than your brain does. The more we're talking to our kids and all of the kids about this, and the more that they're seeing that everyone's brains are different, it's like hair color or facial features. So keep spreading that word. I really appreciate it, Mal.
Amen. That's a great example. And you're right. This is like hair color and eye color. This is to quote Rachel Dorsey, who is this awesome autistic SLP speech language pathologist, who I'll include her website in the chat as like a incredible resources. She defines autism as a neurologically based culture of communication, and like really thinking about the identity aspects, the powerful identity aspects of understanding how you're wired. And like we would never try to train away someone's eye color or like train away someone's hair color. We would also, if somebody, just from like a cultural competency issue, like a cultural competency framework, like if someone comes from a country where it's seen as disrespectful or in any way, like just you don't make eye contact for whatever reason, we would never like train it out of people. Like, what is this? And so I don't know, I like my call to action is like, this is a cultural competency issue. Like, what are we doing to sweet little loves who can't, like, we can't expect sweet little loves to be self-advocates at 2 years old. Like, what are we doing to people? Other questions, comments?
Mel, that just makes me think about like if you think about the DSM definitions of autism, so much of it is rooted in social context. And I feel like that's fascinating because all it implies is that our social system has othered this brain type, right? And so basically, by definition, we're stating that socially, this type of brain is less acceptable than other types of brains are socially accepted. And that's the clinical definition of autism, right? And I don't know, like you're talking about, it's not just autism. I don't know the other definitions the way I know the autism one, but that in itself should kind of be a red flag, shouldn't it?
Of course it should be. And what is very challenging, because, as Matthew said, when you have the kind of brain that is a systems thinker, like a systems thinking pattern matcher, you see the key to the universe all day long, as opposed to, there are some brains, and it's not better or worse, there are some brains that are like zoom in brains. And then there are some brains who can like zoom in and zoom out and zoom in and zoom out. But if you don't ever zoom out, you better be on a team where someone zooms out, and because if you're so zoomed in on the Google map, you don't know what continent you're on. Like, that's how you have the DSM. Like that's the challenge, because the people who like get diagnoses more readily, meaning the people that match the pattern that most of the healthcare system has been. I mean, like, the whole healthcare system uses the DSM, but there are like people who have experiences and training and different brains who kind of take the modern day neuroscience and kind of integrate it with the system they were trained in and kind of do it a little differently. And so the idea would be that those stereotypical behaviors are stress behaviors. So basically, you're more likely to get an autism diagnosis if you are profoundly dysregulated. And no one talks about that. No one talks about that. I didn't get my autism diagnosis until I became profoundly dysregulated. And in the dopamine bound brain needs dopamine. Life circumstances were such that, and this is common in autistic adults, late identified autistic adults who enter something called autistic burnout, which is basically dopamine deficiency. It's how many adults get their diagnosis formally, if they get formally. Autistic burnout is what's it's called in an adult. Regressions to what it's called in a child. Like this is the dopamine bound brain needs dopamine. And if you don't get it, you present with stress behaviors or skills deficits or whatever. You're just, your brain body disconnect, dysregulation. But no one talks about this.
I always feel like hearing you talk is the key to my universe. I feel like I have such clicks when you talk. I'm thinking about somebody in my own life who I've always teased as an A or an F student. And I'm thinking about the dopamine bound brain, and it totally makes sense. If they cared about this fit into, if it gave them dopamine, high achieving. If it didn't give them dopamine, didn't do it, couldn't do it, didn't do it. That's it. Dropped out of college twice. But one of the smartest people I know, when they found what they wanted to study and were able to study that, highly successful master's degree. It's and it clicks when you talk that I'm like, this makes so much sense when you put it in that context. And thinking about how to translate that and talk to kids about it is just, thank you for the work you do. You always open my brain in new ways, and I love it.
Thank you. I think that the other thing about that example makes me think about all the there's so many people who hate school. So when a kid hates school, I don't know. So we've got a special educator in the office and in the audience, but when a kid hates school, there's a mismatch. Kids don't hate school. If they hate school, they're either learning in a way that is different from the way it's being presented, or they're being bullied, or both. There's something happening why a sweet little love would hate school and be refusing to go, and there's some sort of trauma going on. And the question then is what is stressful to this nervous system? And is that cognitive load, social load, energetic load? And there's so many nervous systems, myself included, who have that hypersensitive neuroception. And like demand avoidance is often like an energetic thing. Like if I have a kind of brain that is taking in so much energy, that means I can like feel it when you want to violate my autonomy. And I'm going to flip my lid and I'm going to shut it down before you have a chance to. And that's so much demand avoidance in this universe. I did a group medical visit for adults, for neurodivergent adults, a couple weeks ago, and I was talking about the term PDA, or pathological demand avoidance, which is described not as used as much in the US, but used often in the UK, Australia, other places, that as a subgroup of autistics, such that the threat response, hypersensitive neuroception to autonomy violation. And I was telling this group of adults, I'm like, oh, there's these people, and like all of them were like, that's me, and it became like a funny, very funny thing in a culture of communication where it was totally fine to like talk about the completely irrational things that manifested a pervasive drive for autonomy. And if people don't talk about this, this is the other thing, and I should have talked about this at the beginning even. So like, what's the alternative to not talking about brains? Is that kids create a narrative. If you don't give them a narrative, they create one, and it is almost always that of shame. I'm broken, I'm defective, I'm deficient, everyone else does the thing, I don't do the thing, I'm broken, I'm this and that, and it just is terrible. And like,
Hey, this is Matthew. Along that, usually I won't call, they say Autism Awareness Month. It's, to me, I call it as autism acceptance, understanding, and there's another one word, and understanding of those individuals that society needs to remind themselves that our brains are all different. Plus, we have different challenges within our lifestyle, but we're all one and the same. We all have the same certain different pathways to get there, but we all want that same exact goal, is that inclusiveness, to come around together, knowing the challenges that we have faced ourselves not only within our minds, but the system as a whole, of how to actually, that's intertwined, how to actually put the pieces together in a more constructive way, but in a more meaningful way that actually will get our message across. Thank you.
Thank you. What a beautiful way of summarizing that, because I think what you said matches what we all said at the beginning of the hour. We talked about we are wired for connection. We need to feel safe, and that safety is a prerequisite for access. So safety, physical, emotional safety is a prerequisite, and we can't have it if we don't have inclusion, and we can't have it unless we can zoom way out and say, okay, well, what are the things that are not actually world rules? They're actually just brain rules around what it means to be a person. And that's including even people who learn, think, communicate differently than the typical brain, whatever that is, like internalized ableism and internalized neurotypical bias. That is something that I personally continued to, it was really through parenting that forced me to kind of reckon with the fact that there are so many things that this is what kids do. This is like what it means to play. Play is the pursuit of joy. We're gonna have a brain club on play and inclusive social connection, friend making next week. And so where the idea would be that, who am I to tell a Swillow of how to pursue joy? What is this? So like, and I'll include in the research I'll send out a great podcast actually from the developers of Autism Level Up, a great podcast on like, there's no right way to play. And it's really well done. It's like, do you ever stop and like think about what play means? Why are we telling sweet little loves how to play? If you want to line up objects and look at the really cool ways in which the like refraction of the light reflect, like, awesome, you do you, joy. And I would say that often one of the other brain rules that I hear is that that there are some brains who don't like to play with other people. That's a myth. We're all wired for connection. There are going to be brains who don't feel comfortable in the proximity of other people because it's not safe, because their downstairs brain has assessed the situation and found it lacking. But we're all wired for connection. Well, I really appreciate everyone coming, and I will export the file and upload the captions through the 5-step process that society makes me use to have accessible videos, and then I'll send
Hey
it
Mel, I
out.
have one more question.
Yeah.
That pops into my mind about that. Was is that it's the challenge is how to make those unkind brains, to understand how the way we work, and that's a challenge in itself. And we gotta try the best to teach our what you call unfriendly minds that we are all in this together, and we gotta we have different issues and different circumstances, but let's play together and actually learn from one another, so we can actually be have that inclusive brain that we've all been looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Go for it, Alicia. And then I realize I've been neglecting the chat. I'm going to read that off. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, what I was thinking about especially when we were listening about teaching children and everything to be their own advocates, and especially the story about the little boy at piano. For me, without that being stated when I was younger, that like there are different brains and everything, I learned to gaslight myself. And that's what I did. So if somebody was like, no, that's not how it is, I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm wrong. And to the point now where as a grown adult, I find that gaslighting is like the biggest thing, because I didn't know as a kid. Like to the point I went to a show and partway through the actor changed, and I gaslighted myself that I didn't realize that the actor was a different ethnicity originally. And I was like, what? And I feel like if it had been brought up when we were kids and everything, that everyone's brains are different, that we wouldn't just go straight to, okay, I must be the one who's wrong. I'm the one who's wrong.
That's exactly right. But how could, when you think about it, how could we not have done that? We were told that, no, that's not too, like, what do you mean? That's not too loud? Because like the grown-ups didn't know, they didn't know that we had different brains because of the collective brain rules. So you're like, oh, I guess I don't even know how loud something is. And like at that fundamental level, then when there's more complex things, well, I definitely can't do that. In the chat comments, creating a diagnostic system based on cruelty is inhumane. Yes. So comment about their child going through this at school. Yeah, I mean, it's just like a lot of there's so many examples of that, and we're gonna have a brain club about that. We're gonna have in May, we're gonna have a brain club about inclusiveness, barriers to inclusion in schools. And thank you for another very interesting hour. Wonderful, cool, yeah, amazing, yeah. Thank you all so much for coming, and I hope to see you at next week's Spring Club. Bye.
Thank you, Mel.
You're welcome.
Mel,
Thank
can
you
I
so much, Mel.